Salam, salam, salam ለሁላችሁን. Greetings to everyone. Greetings to everyone. We are back today for another round of history. For those of you who are interested in learning, welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, for another round of history session. I hope we will learn some exciting things. I know I said I wasn't going to come on today, but I'm actually not going to be able to join on Monday. So I'm doing the English version today. For those of you who are new to my page, I've started a series on Ethiopian history, and we're going to be talking about several things. And so the idea is I'm going to try to go live a few times a week, one in Amharic and one in English. And so we can have different people weighing in and discussing. And I think I'm hoping to have an engaging conversation with that. So this is my what is it? Like I said, second time doing it in English. I'll be coming back on tomorrow around 11 o'clock Eastern time to do this same talk, but in Amharic. So those of you who are like, I don't want to hear this guy talking in English, you guys could come back tomorrow. But if you're interested to hear what I do have to say in English and want to engage in English, this is kind of a way to do it. So, KJ, yes, you can ask a question, and I think today I'll be able to invite people on TikTok. So I don't know what's happening on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, but the most that I'll be able to do is post this video. But in terms of engagement, feel free to hop onto my TikTok and you guys can come and ask questions there. At the same time, I want to ask all of you guys to uh, help me share this so it will get to other people. So make sure to share this with other people, share, like, subscribe. I don't know how these things work. So that is what I'll have to say. So let's see. For TikTok, you guys will have to um, write one or something to let me know if you guys do want to come live. And then today I'll be able to accept people on the live so we can have a discussion, a conversation about Ethiopian history. So let's get started. I'm always excited to talk about Ethiopian history. I felt like there's some interesting conversations to be had. Ayn Alam Salam እንዴት አሉ ደህና ኖት ወይ? So but I think it's an important, there's a responsible way to have this conversation as well. The Amharic Paulos will be on Monday, or sorry, tomorrow 11 a.m. we're doing Amharic. Fridays we do that. Well, other days I'll do. So the goal is to have this talk once in English, once in Amharic. So greeting from Holland. So the reason why I started it, I'm not going to do this whole talk again. I already kind of made my case last time. But If you guys are new to this page and trying to understand what I'm doing here, what about history I want to talk about, my biggest goal is to have people engaged in conversations around history in a meaningful way that is not contentious, that is not argumentative. One rule that I do have here is people can ask questions. They can challenge me as much as they want. We could discuss it. My word is not the final word. I may be wrong. So if you want to show me that, hey, these sources are this way, there are other sources that challenge this perspective, I'm more than happy to discuss. What cannot happen is I do not allow like negative contention arguments, or I know today is not a hard day, but sidib. I don't like sidib. So whether that's towards me, towards another person, whatever, I want this a platform to be a platform where we can share ideas. Having said that, I am very much understanding that there are very contentious ideas out there. Um, Insults, thank you. No insults. So I'm very much aware that because of politics, because of various understandings of history, because of religion, and so on and so forth, people really have kind of are triggered when it comes to history. And I'm trying to dismiss this idea, and in a way, it's kind of an experiment to see, are we able to have an engaging conversation without, really coming at each other, right? So I hope we can, and I wish to do that. So let's get to today's topic. Um, Today's topic really is about asking the question, how do we acquire knowledge? So I'll do my best. And like I said, I'm not here to solve every single problem we've had around Ethiopian history. And this is the right way. This is the only thing. This is the only narrative. I don't think that's helpful. But I am here to say, um, look, there's this version of history, and this is how this group of people arrive at this conclusion. There's another type of history, and they arrive at this history from this perspective, and I'll give you my own perspective on what I think, and I usually like to stay somewhere around the middle. This is going to be extremely important for us moving forward. Like I said, we're going to have multiple conversations, and I'm still in the introduction phase, so I'm not going to get into the hard history until maybe a week or 2 weeks from now. But I do want to set the ground up in order for us to have that conversation in a meaningful way. Again, I'm interested about having meaningful dialogues and meaningful conversations. So how do we acquire knowledge? This has been something that's been of interest for me. And I want to know. I want to know, how do we know what we know? This is a branch of study known as epistemology, the study of knowing how we know what we know. What we know is called ontology. The process that we use in order to derive the knowledge that we have acquired is called epistemology. Now, as I've said it last week, and I'll say it again, there's generally speaking two versions of acquiring knowledge, two ways of talking about knowledge. The first one is, of course, the traditional way. This is often the narrative that we find when we walk into a church. If we went to a monastery, if we asked a priest, if we asked someone from the traditional background, we'll get a narrative about Ethiopian history. And the other one is the Western scholarship version of history. And what I'll be talking about over and over again in this platform is, we'll see how these two things often don't go hand in hand together. Za Manuel, I'll accept you, but we're not starting the discussion part just yet. Uh, do you have a quick question, or you just wanted to join the live?
I just wanted to join the live.
Sure, sure. Okay. And then we can have more discussions afterwards. welcome on. And today I'll be able to. I don't know how to do the expanded view, but there it is. But I want to be on top, so it's gonna take me. It's gonna take me a while until I figure it out. But uh,
Sure.
looking forward to discussing with you after the talk. So let me pause here and really say, help me get this word out to other people by sharing this content and letting other people hear it as well. So if you guys could share the live, letting other people hear it, that would be of great help. So there's the traditional view, like I said, is what you might find to expect when you first walk into a an Ethiopian church or some type of religious facility. And the second one would be something you'd expect to hear when you walk into a university. Western universities, right? And these are kind of lectures and PhD, whatever, and they'll give you another version. And you'll see that these two versions do not go hand in hand. They don't agree with one another. So you'll have one version that really opposes the other version. And again, I'm not here to resolve everything today. And neither is that my mission here on this page to resolve all of these differences. I would never claim to do that. But I am here to help you understand how the traditionalists arrive at their conclusion and how the Western arrives at their conclusion. Of course, there's another narrative that is by the politicians. I will say right now, if you are interested in coming here and talking about politics, I'm just not interested. So there are other platforms to do that with, and you could do that later on. I see people are requesting to come into the live. You can come on, but the discussion part will be later on. So as far as a traditionalist, um, this is basically what we find in a church. The primary way of acquiring knowledge is two forms, and I could add a third one if I need to, and that is oral tradition. So a lot of the historical knowledge that we have come to know is through oral tradition. We have, for example, guaewit, and they would go and they will learn from their teachers, and the teachers will teach their teachers, or what we would call tohufit. This is the traditional view. And the second one is using primary documents, whether that's gadlat, or historical books that were written in the 14th, 15th century, Brannames Ahift, right? So they would read these things and say, look, these texts have A, B, C, D. They tell us this thing about our history. They say this thing about our ideas. So this is our concept and understanding of history. The third part that I said, we can gather our information is by revelation from a higher being, whether that's the Holy Spirit or something. That's generally where the traditionalist will acquire their source of information. The Western version, the academia version, completely disregards oral tradition. I'll tell you guys this. I hope I won't get in trouble for saying this publicly, but I'm not going to say the institution, but I was recently at a job interview. It wasn't for me, it was for another person. I was part of the audience. It was a university, and the professor is in the midst of getting interviewed, and I asked, as a professor, if you were able to come to this institution, um, and you were doing some research, and you found that in a particular society the oral tradition goes exactly opposite from the scholarship, what will you do? And the candidate for the job told me, I don't pay attention to oral tradition. And my heart sunk, like literally. I just gasped, because there's a lot of cherished information an oral tradition. So by not looking at it, which is generally, and I'm generalizing a lot, and I understand this, but generally looking aside from the oral tradition, you're doing yourself a big, 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 big disservice. You're doing yourself a huge disservice. But that's what the methodology of Western academia is. So that's when it comes to oral tradition. When it comes to primary documents, this is primary documents, like I mentioned, is it could be Gadlat, it could be Dirsanat, it could be Ta'amir, it could be whatever Branamas after there is. The Western is highly suspicious. Highly suspicious. They'll read it, they'll organize it, they'll catalog it, they'll do whatever they need to do with it. But in terms of acquiring knowledge, the primary sources in itself is not the focus. Instead, they rely heavily on what other scholars had to say. Most of the time, the other scholars were unfortunately colonialists. I see that someone is requesting Mr. Again, I'm just saying, if you're going to join the live, we ask that you mute until the discussion portion of the program. So, to quote you guys, who these scholars are. For example, Carlo Conti Rossini has said, and I can give you guys more references if you need. Si studi l'individuo anche per saperlo governare. And I don't speak Italian. I apologize for my accent. But essentially, he says, one may also study the native to learn to govern him. This is Carlo Conti Rossini. He is mentioned throughout Ethiopian scripts and Ethiopian history, and all of these people generally have written an extensive amount on history. So this was their philosophy on Ethiopia. You study their books not because they have historical value, but because we study these things so that we can colonize these people. These are Italians that wrote this. Unfortunately, as I've said last week, it is their writings that current day so-called historians are using to write about us. So what are the positive aspects? So I've talked about these two versions. There's a traditional view, and then there's the Western view of narrating history. And I've said a little bit about their weak points, but what about their strength? Well, for the traditionalist, like I said, oral tradition is extremely valuable, especially in an era where not everyone had access to writing. People transmitted information orally. So today, when we're trying to acquire history, we don't just stop and say, unless I see it written down, I will not accept this. Especially when it comes to African tradition, oral tradition is a big part. This is not just an Ethiopian and Eritrean phenomenon. This is true throughout African societies. So we can't simply ignore all of the oral tradition that has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and start and say, let's have a conversation about history based on the things that are only written. That's not how the society existed in the region. Also, an important aspect that I wish everyone was sensitive to is the concept of saying, let's only trust written documents is a Western philosophy. The concept of saying, unless I see it, I touch it, I smell it, I taste it, it doesn't exist, in itself is a Western way of thinking. Again, this is a branch of philosophy known as epistemology. That is the way that we learn what we learn, the way of knowing what we know. How do we know these things, right? How do we know what we know? Again, I see people requesting in the live. Again, if you come to the live, I just asked that you mute until the discussion part. And then after that, we can talk about just anything that you want. Again, I will just remind people today is the English portion of the discussion. If you wish to engage in Amharic, we can also do that tomorrow. So Western societies have, uh, as we all know, propagated the scientific method, right? Unless it's empirical, it could be tested, we can touch it, we can see it, then it doesn't exist, is essentially their philosophy. And this philosophy led to the emergence of people like George Hegel, who boldly declared Africa has no history. Africa has no history. When he's saying this, what he's really saying is that Africa didn't produce anything written. Africa didn't produce anything that we can test. Ergo, Africa has no history. He's not alone in this. David Hume, who claimed, I am apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior to the whites. This is the kind of body of knowledge or scholarship that was getting produced with this concept of saying, unless we see it, unless we touch it, unless we taste it, it does not exist. This is the Western way of thinking. Of course, traditionalists would come out and say, how is that even realistic? Of course, there's oral tradition and there are other ways of acquiring knowledge other than what we call empirical evidence. This is perhaps most important when talking about religion. As an Ethiopian Orthodox Sohado Christian member and as a deacon, I can tell you this is particularly disturbing when engaging with the Protestant movement in Ethiopia. You will see a lot of the discussions, especially here, if you guys are TikTokers and talking to my TikToking friends, you'll see things like, where is the proof? I want to see the proof. Where is your evidence? I want to see the evidence. This is the stylistic way of discussing. Now, I'm all for proof. My background is in engineering. I'm not saying we just accept things blindly, but just recognize that this philosophy of saying, unless I see it, unless I touch it, it doesn't exist, is inherently a Western philosophy. It's inherently a Western philosophy. This is why, even in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church tradition, you have Likaunt, who may not give you the specific biblical verses and cite, Matthew chapter 4, verse 6 or whatnot. They may not be able to do, but they understand Christianity like a scholar does, right? Because their way of thinking is not finding proof, but living the life. It's a different approach, a methodological approach to engaging with knowledge, in this case with religion. More importantly, this concept of saying, unless I see it, unless I touch it, unless I taste it, it doesn't exist. In the realm of talking about religion, of course, we're here to talk about history, but this is, I think, an important conversation. We're giving very little room to the Holy Spirit. Like I said earlier, when acquiring Ethiopian history, we are considering the traditionalists to say they invoke oral tradition, primary sources, and even give room to the Holy Spirit to say, people have been inspired by the Spirit to acquire this knowledge. When you go to the Western, of course, any discussion of the divine is automatically rejected. Of course, I'm not at all suggesting we should accept things on blind faith. We do have to give reasoning. Even the Bible tells us, give reasoning for the things that you believe in. But also taking a step back and recognizing that there are different forms of acquiring knowledge. This needs to be a concept that we all are at least cognizant of while we have these conversations. On the other spectrum, Western culture claims they are the sole owner of scientific method. I can say a lot about that, but I won't. But what I will say is this is especially true when it comes to theology, what we call the Eurocentric approach of discussing about history. That is, history started in Europe and it will finish in Europe. So whenever you talk about different societies in different parts of the world, people from the Eurocentric approach will often say, look, Europe did this. This is why the rest of the world is this way. This is also true for when it comes to religion, particularly Christianity. This is disturbing. I've said it before, I'll say it again, especially my brothers and sisters who have attended theology. Why is it that in early church history, which is a class within the window parameters of theology, Ethiopia is randomly, or I should say rarely stated. Now, we believe that the church, not we believe, we have facts, and I'll talk about this some other time, that the church started at least from the 4th century, if not the 1st century. Even the Westerner will believe the church has been around since the 4th century. Traditionalists will tell you since the 1st century. So if the church has been around since then, how is it that in any church historical books or church early church programs, we do not see the mentions of Ethiopians or Ethiopia or Eritrea or Eritreans? How is that even possible? Well, the problem is, even in the realm of religion, where we're saying your nationality does not matter, we're emphasizing the European model of Christianity over the other ones. This is why I'm saying we've got to wake up as Africans and reclaim our own history. We've got to have agency to say, let's talk about our history from our perspective. What about the Ethiopian tradition? Does that mean we negate all the European versions? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But we have got to start recognizing that we were we surely did something in 2000 years. We contributed to some concepts, some ideas in the past 2000 years, and these must be talked about. So again, these are the strength of the traditionalist. What about the strength of the Westerner? I've gone on and on about the traditionalist, and you may think, oh, okay, clearly he's all about the tradition, and that means no proof, no nothing. Absolutely not. I think we have extremely important things to learn from the Western perspective as well, what we call the Western paradigm. So, for oral tradition, for example, not all oral tradition is reliable. And especially to the traditionalist, this could be shocking to hear, right? But take, for example, if I say I was born in Ethiopia, there's no way for you to test that, right? Like, I could be lying. I could have a reason why I said I was born in Ethiopia. I may be mistaken. Maybe I was born outside of Ethiopia. My parents, just for whatever reason, didn't want to tell me. But all I have is oral tradition. But now if I come with a passport, a birth certificate, and I show you where I was born, suddenly that's the proof. Again, people that are requesting to come on live, I just ask that you mute for this part of the talk, and you can start with the discussion section. I see more people coming in. Again, just I ask that you mute until the discussion portion of the conversation. All right, so let's keep going. So the for the Westerner, and one of the things that we will understand is we simply have no way of testing the traditionalists or the oral tradition. Therefore, for the Westerner to say, I don't accept the oral tradition, he's on to something. Of course, we can't dismiss the oral tradition, but at the same time, this does not at all mean we've got to take all oral tradition at face value. In fact, if we go into detail and do analysis, we start to recognize that some oral traditions contradict with one another. But it's not only here. Even primary documents may not be reliable. And this is kind of the perspective of the Western perspective. Let's work on this theory a little bit more. So just because something was written a long time ago, and in the context of Ethiopian history, just because something was written in Ge'ez, it doesn't make it historically reliable. It just tells us that it was written a long time ago and it was written in Ge'ez. And there are books that people can write that could make up stories, that could lie, that could say whatever. So when the Western tells us, we've got to be critical of these texts, especially when it comes to history. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a history. And when it comes to historical documents, when the Westerner tells us we should be critical, we should be critical. For example, we've said things like Gadla Estefanos, which is written apparently a long time ago in Giz. Well, there's some historical information in there that the church itself says we don't recognize this. So there are things that are written a long time ago, and simply because they were written a long time ago, they don't automatically become true. So here is the important part that we need to take away. For the traditionalist, when he's coming in with his oral traditions, and he's looking at his primary document, we should give value to the oral traditions. We shouldn't dismiss it and throw it out automatically and think to ourselves, we can reconstruct all of concepts about history while at the same time ignoring a large chunk of how we acquire knowledge for the traditionalist. For the Westerner, we've got to be critical when we're talking about history of engaging with oral tradition, particularly when these oral traditions contradict some of the things that come from other knowledges, like primary books. And even when talking about primary Branna Metzahift, just because they're written in Giz, just because they're written a long time ago, it doesn't automatically certify them as credible sources. So, what's the best approach? Like I said, somewhere in the middle. We need to be able to listen to the oral tradition, recognizing and giving room to the Holy Spirit, while critically examining the primary sources, that is Gadlat, Tamirat, Dirsanat, whatever books they are, of us acquiring history. These two things have got to come together when we're here to talk about history. Again, I'm not here to talk about religion. Dogma is dogma. I don't send a trend for dogma, but nobody has authority over history. We're here to talk about history. So how do we acquire history? We investigate it, but we investigate it recognizing that from the Western perspective, there's some positive things that does come to the table. And from the traditionalist, there's a lot of positive things that come along with it. And we've got to marry these two worlds together. Unless we do that, we are missing a huge deal of information. So, how do we talk about history? Now that we understand where we acquire knowledge from, how we acquired history, and the two versions of acquiring history, how do we talk about history? Or another way to ask this question, and I've asked this before, is Ethiopian history good or bad? Is our history overall, is it good or bad? Most of the time, this is how people talk about Ethiopian history. Either they will come on and say Ethiopian history is the worst thing that ever happened. It's the worst thing for everybody. How could you guys talk about this? Or they'll tell you Ethiopia is the best thing that ever happened. We're better than the rest. We're great, and all this rhetoric. I personally think history is history, and history is complicated. Because history is complicated, there is no one narrative or one way of narrating history. There are times in history where things turn good, and there are times in history where things turn bad. There were times in history where people came together, and there are times in history where people fought and killed each other. But as a historian, or from a historical perspective, we've got to do the due diligence of talking about both sides. Is when I wrote my book, Hopeless Romantic, The Untold History of Ethiopia, the way that I narrated history is by talking about it from the lens of the marriage. Just like when you talk about a marriage, there are times in a marriage where the husband and the wife, they may fight. There are also times in a marriage where the husbands and the wife, well, not sometimes, but hopefully a lot of times, where they make up and they have love for one another. But that entirety is what makes up the history. There's good side and there's bad side. But if you're just picking up the parts where the husband and the wife fought, and you want to reconstruct historical perspectives of saying that the entirety of the Ethiopian history was contentious, you're doing yourself a disservice. On the other end, if you're just picking out just the good parts where the husband and the wife made up, and never considering the parts that they fought, you're also doing yourself a disservice. If you want to get that full picture, the entirety of Ethiopian history, We've got to sit through the good and the bad. That's going to make us uncomfortable. If you're a person who, for whatever reason, may not be into Ethiopia or Ethiopians for whatever reason, it's going to make you feel uncomfortable to hear about the good parts. If you're a person who loves Ethiopia, then it's going to make you very comfortable to hear about the bad parts. But we've got to challenge these things because they are part of our history and they don't go away simply by ignoring it. Now, for me, I've already said it before, and I'm very much proud to say I'm an Ethiopian. I love my history. I'm proud of my history. And part of me says there's nothing wrong to be proud of our country. In fact, the rest of the world is patriotic in this regard. That is to say, they are very proud of their nations and their countries, but it's only when it comes to us, Ethiopians and Eritreans, that we begin to have a problem with our history. When I was a kid back in Ethiopia, I had Saratanya, somebody who would help. I don't know what Saratanya is in English, but during that time, she was, for those of you guys who only speak English, Saratanya are people in Ethiopia and Eritrea that would come in the house and help do things around that place. So most of them would come from the countryside, they, and things like that. I'll let you define what country means. So then when she was talking to me, I remember I was a little kid. She told me that something about her sister. And I said, I didn't know you had a sister. Where is she? And she said, she is in America. This is back in Ethiopia. Sorry. She said her sister was in Gunnet. She said, no, I'm messing up the story. I apologize. She said, my sister is in America. And I was like, what's America? That was the first time I heard of this country named America. And she said, America is this beautiful place. And, one day we'll all go to America. And then I was like, what is she talking about? I didn't understand what she was saying when she said all this stuff. Well, it turns out that her sister had died. And she was trying to tell me that her sister was actually in the kingdom of heaven. But she didn't want to tell me this because I was a young kid. And instead, she said her sister was in America. America being a metaphor for the kingdom of heaven. Now, a question I ask in my book is, why is America the country that's used to represent the kingdom of heaven? What's so special about America that suddenly we're comparing it to the kingdom of heaven? And it's not just my babysitter who said that, but this is true of a lot of Africa. We idolize America. We measure intelligence based on how well somebody speaks English. Go check it out. When people talk, they say, you don't even speak English correctly. We use this as a reference to measure somebody's intelligence. We say things like, he's been in America for 15 years and he still thinks like an African. What's wrong with thinking like an African? Knowingly or unknowingly, we have allowed ourselves to be the inferior person that Westerners told us to be. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm talking about? So for me, I think talking about history is important because it gives us agency to say, look, we've got to tell our history in a way that we need to tell the history. And more importantly, we tell the story in a way that is accurate. But we could tell the story in a way that we are proud of our history. There's no reason why when we talk about history, we've got to talk about the history from a negative perspective. Like I said, the rest of the world thinks good things about their own history. They have heroes that they admire, that generally speaking, people are in consensus about. For example, when talking about Jefferson or Washington or Martin Luther King, there is a general understanding these were heroes of America. But what about Ethiopia? Who's our hero? Zereyako, if I say Zereyako, 50 people would say he was the greatest thing that happened to the church. 50 people would say he was the worst thing that happened. Janohe, 50 people would say he was good. 50 people would say he was bad. Dare I say Minilik? Then we'll start a civil war. Who is our hero? Seriously. And an important question to ask here is, why don't we have a hero? Why is our history so contentious to the point that we can't even talk about history? People would rather talk about religion. There are many TikTok rooms to discuss about religion, Protestants and Muslims and Orthodox and Protestant, like all these different rooms to engage. Yeah, sometimes it goes negative, but there are these rooms. How many times do you see rooms open and dedicated to talking about history? What's more important, the kingdom of heaven or our identity, our history? Clearly the kingdom of heaven. If at all, it should be these religious things that divide us. But we've found a way to at least have some middle ground over this and have meaningful conversations over this. You don't think about this when it comes to history. People are so divided. Again, why? Why is this happening? You see, we've got to wake up, take agency, take ability to start saying, okay, we need to have a way of having a conversation about history that doesn't end in trying to kill each other. You're allowed to have a view, a perspective different than me. And I'm able to have a perspective that's different from you. We'll sit here, we'll engage, we'll have a conversation. Some of you may disagree with everything that I said. Some of you may be like, that's exactly what I want. But that's not why I'm here. My goal is to have everyone discuss history in a way that's conducive to our community. Because let's get real, the heartbeat of the problems we see in Ethiopia and Eritrea boil down to our perception of history. So this is what I have for today. Now we can get into the discussion portion of the program. I'm not sure how this is gonna go. There's I guess comments. I'm on live on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I don't know how to do it in the other forms. So if you guys write on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, if you guys write, I'll be able to communicate with you. TikTok, you could come and join here and ask questions. Here's the rule for the discussion portion. I want you guys to ask as many questions as you can. You're able to challenge me. You can try. You could say, "Hey, this part is wrong. This part is right." Whatever you want, we can have a discussion. All I ask is to do it in a way that is healthy and respectful. If we talk about and one other rule, I'm just not interested in politics. Do not come to me and talk to me about politics. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. I'll give you a warning and you're out of here. We're here to talk about history. I'm not. You could talk about ethnics. You could talk about ethnic groups. You could say, look, the history of how the Oromo people came into Ethiopia. You could talk all about that. I'll talk about that. You could talk about the history of Amara and Tigray and how they mingled and how we could talk all about this. All that stuff is we are allowed to do. What we cannot do is talk about politics. And I'll let you know what I mean by politics when we get there. So that's the thing. With that being said, I see some comments on YouTube. So let me first address those, and I'll come back to TikTok, especially since there's some people here on the guest. So Ainalem is asking, Okay, thank you. She's saying that in order for young people to listen to it, this should be after school. I'll keep that in mind next time when I go live. I went live today because I'm not planning to go live next week, and this was the opportune time that I could find. Uh, Okay, Adu said having one source of historical knowledge is damaging as history is conducted in many perspectives. I completely agree, Adu. Thank you for that comment. Okay, um, now coming to uh, TikTok. Those of you who have comments or something to say, we can uh, go from there. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on. I think I did it. Okay, if you guys have questions, we can go from there. From the guests.
Why am I on the big one?
I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to change it.
Actually, okay. Then I think Ortho Christos might help you how to minimize the size since you have more experience in life than me.
Okay.
So I'm here. Actually, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm trying to make film based on history, especially Ethiopian histories. So I was here to learn. Actually, I don't have any questions for now.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. For Yodit Fakade, hi, why did you write Hopeless Romantic in the perspective of marriage? Um, for a lot of reasons. So those of you who may not be aware, I wrote history on Ethiopian history, and I wrote it from a perspective of an angle of marriage. And the reason why I did that is for one reason. So I'm a student of Kane, and I love Kane. That is poetry. So when I was writing, I wanted to write with a metaphor. And when it comes to love, right, we all love marriage is obviously the way that we manifest the ultimate sign of love. So and then my way of saying, the one that I want to marry, or the one that I love, my loved one is Ethiopia, right? So that's what I was trying to do there. Also, writing the book Hopeless Romantic, usually the term hopeless romantic here in America, it means defying the odds, right? Even though there are a lot of problems in the way of you and the one that you want to be with, you like if you fight and get to the end and uh, end up with that person, then you're considered a hopeless romantic. So for me, in a time where it's very contentious and there are many things happening in Ethiopia, I am a hopeless romantic that one day peace will come. People tell me that I'm crazy, but hey, I believe it. I believe it. We just have to work at it, and that's why I did it that way. መምህር ሕዝቅያስ ሰላም ብያለው። አንድ ሁለት የምትለን ነገር ካለ መምህር ሕዝቅያስ ስራ ላይ ናቸው መሰለኝ። መልካም እሺ። ሌላ ጥያቄ ካለ or if there are other questions, I can take some questions, and if there are not, we can end here. No other questions? It's very quiet today. There are usually a lot of comments and things like that. I think it's because it's in English and people are like, I'm not sure if I want to talk in English. Oh, okay. Was the problem the show?
Hello?
Yes. ሰላም ዲያቆን ህዝቅያስ እንዴት አሉ መምህራችን?
እንዴት አሉ የኔታ? ሰላም ነው ወይ?
እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን።
አከበዱብን እኮ በእንግሊሽ አድርገው። ወይኛ ወይ እርሶ አማርኛ የሰባብሩ ወይኛ እንግሊሽን ሰባብር። ሚድል ግራውንድ ለቋንቋው
ነው እንዴ?
ኦኬ መልካም ነው። I have a question. ግን ያው በአክሰንት መሳቅ አይቻልም። ኮመንት ላይ የምትሰጡ ሰዎች can history get fixed or history can repeat itself? ወይም በአማርኛ የተበላሸን ታሪክ ማስተካከል ይቻላል? በተለይ በኢትዮጵያ በጣም ብዙ የተበላሸ ታሪክ አለ። ያው ሰዎች አንኮምፈርተብል ይሆናሉ እንዳሉት እርሶም ለምሳሌ ስዊድኖች በረሃብ ደረጃ ጫማ ቀቅለው በልተዋል። ጫማቸውን ቀቅለው በልተዋል። ግን ያንን ታሪክ አያውቁም። እንዴት አድርገው ፊክስ አደረጉት? የኛ የረሃብ ታሪክ እንኳን ስቲል ይነገራል እና እንኳን የጦርነቱ ለምሳሌ አሜሪካ ውስጥ ብለዲ ሳንዴይ የምትባል ድልድይ አለች። ጥቁሮቹ ከነጮቹ ለማምለጥ ብለው ራሳቸውን እየከተቱ የሞቱበት እነሱ ታሪኮች እስካሁን ጠባሳ ናቸው። እና ግን አሜሪካ ላይ እንደሚያውቁት እርሶ ያው ሰላም ሆነው ይኖራሉ። የውስጥ ሬሲዝም ቢኖራቸውም እንደኛ እስኪባሉበት አይደለም። እና how do we do it? ጠባሳውን ይዘን the scar, the wound could be there, but how do we do it? How we gonna rewrite new history? How can we rewrite new chapter for the new generation? ኤክሰደስ እና ኦሪት ዘጸአት እና ኦሪት ዘዳግም፣ ኦሪት ዘጸአት ቀድመው ለወጡት ነው። ኦሪት ዘዳግም ደግሞ ለተወለደው ለአዲሱ ጀነሬሽን ነው። ጥያቄን ሰብሰብ ሳረገው ራሱ ሂስትሪ ሪፒት አድርጎ ሌላ ችግር ውስጥ ከመግባታችን በፊት how can we accept the true history, the story that happened before, and how can we rewrite a new history?
ለእኔ ነው ወይስ
ለእርሶ ነው የኔታ?
Okay, so the question is, how can we re-accept, or what was the word? Sorry, I missed it.
So history cannot be like fixed. Once it happened, isn't it?
Yes.
So a lot of countries, they accept what happened and they do a transition with that bad history. For instance, America, there is a slavery. Once the slavery stopped, they stopped that fight. Right. They didn't go back. They moved forward. In our country, we are killing each other with the past history. So how do we make people accept the past as a past? How can we rewrite new history for the new generation?
I got it. This is a very good question. Thank you for that. So the first thing I would say is, I don't think we have a clear consensus on what the history is. And that is part of the problem. I think that there's still a lot of conversation about what is the history that we accept. What is the history? For example, when you come into any American society and you say slavery existed, no one is going to say, no, it didn't. Right? No one is going to say that. But unfortunately, right now, in the Ethiopian context, when you make a claim about Ethiopian history, everybody's going to say something different. The basic claim about Ethiopian history is out for a debate. So the first thing I would say is it possible to come, you bring your sources, I'll bring my sources, let's sit down and let's let's come to a conclusion about our understanding about history. And even then, if my version is different from your version, in our tradition we have something called andimta, andim እንደዚህ የሚል አለ, አንድም እንደዚህ የሚል አለ. At least let's have that version of history recorded in history. One.
But wouldn't you say that's biased if there's two different accounts of two different things?
No, I would say that that's scholarship. It's done all the time, right? So there are different parts, different parts of the world that has theories about how things emerged. And the first theory is this, the second theory is this. Based on this evidence, we can conclude, or we can say this perspective based on this theory, we can say this is true. Using different paradigms, you can say, look, both of them is true. From a scholarship perspective, what you'd say is, I don't know if you're in academia, but you have the literature review section of anything that you publish, right? So in the literature review section, you'll say, Steve argued the following, Paul said this, David said this, and therefore my research is contributing from this element. And then you add on to the body of knowledge that existed. So what you can do is, you bring in your evidence, I'll bring in my evidence, and we'll try to see if we could agree. Now, if we don't, what we can do is say, all right, there's the school of thought of A, there's the school of thought of B, and then for the new generation, which is the question, let's try to find a way to marry these concepts together for us to have a better understanding.
So sorry to interrupt, Dawood.
No worries.
So, for example, when you have Muslim historians fully ignoring the miracles that happened from the Orthodox Church, we have like countless miracles, them ignoring it and saying, "Oh, it's all just fairy tales," or never even reporting as an account. That's a biased perspective, rather than having Christians where they just write everything.
Right.
You see what I mean? That's two different history right there.
Well, I'm not sure when you joined this talk. So one of the things that I said before is there's two ways of acquiring knowledge, right? So the first one is what I would call the Western academia version. So, for example, Western academia version generally does not accept anything that is not of empirical evidence. So if you went and said, I prayed and had an intercession, a prayer answered, and this was intercession, you're just not going to be able to get that published in any serious academic journal. Why? You can't test it. You can't put that to question. You can't do anything about that, right? Then you have the traditional view. And by the way, this is not just true of Ethiopia. This is true of a lot of traditions. There's a lot of claims the Quran may make that cannot be tested or accepted in academia. Just like there's a lot of tradition that Christian claims that cannot be tested. For example, I was having this conversation yesterday. The resurrection of Christ is not an empirical question. It's not a scientific question. It's a question of faith. However, the crucifixion of Christ is a historical question that can be answered historically, right? And the scientist will tell you, although, for example, Bart Ehrman from Chapel Hill University, who's a known atheist, will agree that Christ's crucifixion was an undeniable historical evidence, but reject his resurrection because he does not appeal to a higher divine power. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there are ways where people can reject what they reject, but what I'm talking about here is there are two ways of acquiring knowledge, and what do we consider evidence? The Western will tell you if they can't touch it, if they can't see it, if it cannot be tested through the scientific method, then it does not exist. The traditionalists will say, if it's oral tradition, if my ancestors have told me, then it is something that I likely will accept. Does that make sense? Coptic, are you sure?
Yes, thank you so much, Dawood.
No problem. I see a question here on Instagram. La Bonite has said, I think the best thing we can do is rewrite our history books based on the right resources and evidence, deal with the real raw truth, and avoid biased and fallacious perspectives. The only thing I'll say to that, and this is kind of going off of what Mehmet Hiskas has said, is I personally think whatever has been written should be kept in history. I agree with you, my dear sister, when we say I do think we need a new textbooks, new history books for curriculums. However, all of the things that have occurred in our generation, including the negative ones that people are very triggered by, should be kept in the textbooks. Why? We have to learn from them. If there is a time, if there is a generation that comes and says, let us unite, I think all of the things that have transpired in the past year, 2, 3 years, 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, it's the greatest lesson that we can give to the future generation. People can learn from all of these things what ethnic feuds really does on the ground, what killing each other amounts to, and what that results in. So all of these things can be a great history lesson in itself, right? But in terms of moving forward, we've got to understand, like I said, we have to come together, put the things in written form, say what is your source of history, what is my source of history, can we come to an understanding? If we cannot, at least let's keep both versions and say there's version A and version B, and now what can the future generation do to build a version C by re-examining these documents over and over again? Great question. There is a question from YouTube. When discussing history, what would be the cutoff point of the time period for not mentioning certain events, political groups, etc., to not get into politics? I personally think everything is game. We have to talk about history, but I will say that people are interested in each person is interested in a particular history. I myself, I'm very much interested in Aksumite period, Zagwe period, and early Solomonic period. That is the part of history that I'm interested in. I dabbled into modern day history, but I think all aspects need to be viewed. So what I mean by politics is, and why I say I don't want to talk about politics is, there is a version of history that I'm not going to get into the details, but purposefully amending, bending, changing the historical knowledge that we have for the purpose of advancing a particular political agenda. This happens all the time, right? And this is purposefully done to change a narrative, not challenge a narrative. I'm all for challenging. Let's challenge as much as we can, but changing a narrative for the sole purpose of benefiting their own political agenda. That I have no room for, no space for. Just I can't deal with it, right? So when I'm looking at the history, I'll judge it based on historical grounds, but I will not allow myself, my political ideas, my even my religious background. When it comes to history, I will not let my religious background dictate my perspective about history. Do you think politicians are interested in scientific methods? No. Well, it depends which politicians we're talking about, right? But the politicians that are often the loudest. They don't seem to care about what the science has to say. They seem to care about their political agenda, and that is my problem, is in all sides. I'm not talking about one side or the other. I've said it before. A lot of the times when we start talking about the Orthodox Church, there's a particular group that appears to think that we're there to support their political agenda. I'm not here to do that. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care what your ideology is. I am here. I take scholarship very seriously, very seriously. And even though it may go against some things that I thought was right, or some of my perspectives, if that is the history, that is a history. We have a duty to talk about it. In Instagram, we have a question: what is the best approach in evaluating our perception, and where to start to have a non-biased understanding based on historical evidence? That's a really good question, Gage. It's difficult, isn't it, to be able to not be biased? I think in reality, everybody is biased to some degree. I will tell you my bias, and I have been very clear. I am Ethiopian Orthodox Father Church member. I am biased towards my church. I am an Ethiopian. I'm biased against for my country. I love my country. I want things that talk positively about the country. And I'm biased against the West. I think they came in a very negative light. However, when I look at the data, I try to let the data sway me towards the result. I don't begin, even when I'm looking at church history or I'm looking at Ethiopian history, I don't begin with the conclusion in mind. I allow the data points to point me there. Then, like I said before, being cognizant of the fact that there is oral tradition to be sensitive to, I would say, well, there's a gap between what oral tradition is telling me and what the scholarship is telling me. And depending on what that is, depending on what that looks like, I'll either stop there or I'll move forward and make conclusions from there. And sometimes you just cannot make conclusions. When we're studying these things, it's okay to say we just don't know what happened in this time period. We don't have enough data. For example, I'm going to talk about this sometime. Before Aksumites were the Damot Empire. I don't know what to tell you about Damot. I don't know what we could say about them other than we know that they existed. So these are the things that I feel like we can discuss about. And if again on TikTok, if you guys want to discuss, feel free to come live, and make sure you guys keep sharing this page so that others can also come and engage in Ethiopian history. Do other people have questions?
I have one question for you.
Yes, Mohammed.
So you gave up engineering to work on this side, so it's a lot of sacrifice. But are you gonna bring all Ethiopian history book you can criticize so we can know which one is lie, we can know which one is truth in the near future? Can you do that? Like, there are a lot of history books that are written in bad way, like to make us fight each other. So are you gonna bring those books and criticize them in public so people can know and understand them, and they are a lie, there are a bunch of politics? So if you do that, it will be great. And the second question I have is how far you are willing to go to change this horrible history.
Right. This is an interesting question. So for the first part, am I going to come and show which book is a lie, which book is true? No, I'm not going to do that. And here's why. I think there is a bigger and more pressing question to ask, which is getting people to think about history. I personally don't see the exercise of saying which one is true, which one is false is what we need right now. And to be blunt with you, there would need to be more analysis. That it's not easy to come and say this book is a lie. Each book would need very much a lot of attention to see, to do that kind of like serious scholarship. You this one don't believe, this one believe, like that kind of approach. From a scholarship perspective, you need to get all the manuscripts. You need to study which manuscripts, when it entered. You need to see who wrote it, why was it written, and do all these analysis that I think is a bigger project to tackle. But I think an important and interesting question is getting people to start thinking about how we acquire knowledge. Number one, that is my goal. Number two, engaging people in a way that they don't feel threatened every time they talk about history. So even with the so-called bad books, can people come and discuss without fighting? Okay, it's a bad book. Okay, let's assume that. All right. So now what? Now what? Are you gonna punch me in the face because it's a bad book? What's gonna happen? So are we able to have this kind of exercise and able to have this dialogue that even when you don't believe me, even when you don't when you don't accept my data, can we have a conversation that doesn't end up with me and you fighting? So that's I think an interesting point. How far am I willing to go to changing this bad history? Again, my interest is not in changing the history, but recognizing a way to understand history. And there's, in my view, the untold history, this history that's not told, and the history that has been hijacked by Western scholarship. This, I think, is perhaps the part that I can contribute the most to. Being Ethiopians, we completely neglect the fact that we have been influenced by colonialism. And all these, well, I'm very new to TikTok, but recently I've been a TikToker going into different groups. I'm genuinely surprised at how little we mention colonialism, even in the contexts of the Protestant entrance into Ethiopia. Again, this is not about an Orthodox and a Protestant thing, but we've got to talk about colonialism and its impact on history and the dynamic of the society. I mean, the Western Protestant scholar will admit this. Why can't we? So these are the type of things that I think is very much we should be very comfortable to say. But when we say this, we've got to understand that I'm gonna feel uncomfortable. You're gonna feel uncomfortable. We're all gonna feel uncomfortable at times. And there are gonna be times where we're gonna be happy, we're gonna be proud, we're gonna be yes, right? But when we put everything to the test, I mean everything. And allowing ourselves to really talk about these various things. Other questions? Other questions? TikTok today, you guys are very quiet. What's your take on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church being merged with the Coptic Orthodox Church? Ooh, that is a very interesting question. I'm gonna spend a lot of time on the relationship between the Coptic and the Ethiopian Church, and one of the stories that really we need to review is our understanding of the relationship between Ethiopia and Egypt. It may not have been what we think it was. Again, I'll bring my data. I'll bring what I know, and then we'll go and talk about it from there. Other questions?
May I ask you a question, sir?
Please, Abel.
I have a question.
Please, yes.
Yeah, what I'm looking at, the historical of Ethiopian, the biblical, and the European are very different. The whole European do not have any historical evidence about religious, but they are trying to collect our historical evidence to their own. And they are writing new books about the old history, our Ethiopian history. All are different from the source, but they are creating their own imaginations and their own world and they are just feeding their people, their students, with their own culture. Especially the England or the Britons are interested for our history. What is the intention behind this thing? Would you please tell us about this?
This is amazing. Abid, have you been at Hamburg University? Have you gone through the philology department?
No, I have not. I have never been there. No, but I'm reading their book, and I'm just interested with reading historical books. But what I'm looking at is they are just pulling the whole Ethiopian history to their own.
So you're onto something big, and that's actually one of the reasons why I came on this platform. Is again, I talk about colonialism, Gazat, and I don't think people really understand what it is. Most of the time, when we think about colonialism, we think that a bunch of white folks came together and said, "Hey, we're gonna go to Africa. We're gonna, rule over these people. We're gonna export their goods and then come back." That's our basic understanding of Gazat, which is true. It has a lot of truth and depth into it. But the form of colonialism that took place in Ethiopia is quite different. And especially when you begin to study Italian history in conjunction with Ethiopian history, you begin to see a different form of colonialism. And this, we're going to take a lot of time to talk about. But since our brother Abel brought up the idea. So just like Ethiopia, and there's this thing that we call Ethiopianism, was very much kind of praised for being the hope for Africa by Africans. And it was seen as this region where all African descendants can look towards for hope at a time where the West was coming to colonize them. In some journal articles, Ethiopia was even seen as the European version of Africa, which is a different problem altogether. Especially when Minilik and during the Battle of Ottawa defeated the Italians, the West was at a loss to explain the event that occurred because they said, how is it possible that an African can defeat an Italian? And then they recognized and came to the conclusion that Minilik must have been white. They called him the white African. Conversely, when talking about Italian history or Italians, they said, how is it possible that the white man lost to the black man? They must be black. So there was this inferiority complex that was being created for the Italians to make them feel like they were sub-European, sub-white, below the rest. So they desperately wanted to come back to Ethiopia to avenge their history. And during Mussolini's period, there were a series of so-called scholars like Carlo Conti Rossini and Enrico Cerulli who came back and studied the history. But the way that they studied their history and the reason why they studied this history was just like Abel said, to prove to the rest of the European world the commonalities between Ethiopian and European history. A lot of the study was not to make Ethiopia seem subpar. It was to elevate Ethiopians' position to say Italians must conquer this region, and later on they do. And then they could claim, look, this Ethiopia that we conquered is not like the rest of Africa. We conquered a part of Europe. It's our own place. Now, for the Italians, this was critical because what they're essentially saying to Great Britain and Germany and the rest of the European world is you guys conquered the weaker African nations, but we conquered the great Ethiopia. Why this is important to know is that the modern day Ethiopian, when they read their stories and their literature and their books, and they see how greatly they talked about Ethiopians. Am I still here on TikTok? I'm getting a phone call. I think I'm good, right? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay, I think I lost. Can you guys hear me?
I think something went wrong. Yeah, we are hearing you.
Okay, now you guys can hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, perfect. So when it came to the Italians, the most heartbreaking thing that really gets to me is their writings. The literature of the colonialists is written in a way that appears to be talking positively of Ethiopia. Little does the Ethiopian know that the reason why they're talking greatly about Ethiopian history is so that they colonize him. Because for the
Thank you very
Italian,
much.
yeah,
Mhm.
for the
Thank you very much. And I just I want to ask you one more question. You know, I think Dakon guys know more about this. Do you know about Abatas Fasilasi Mogas? I think you know this person. He passed away some years ago. But he was interested about Ethiopian history. He wrote a lot of books, and he was very, very intelligent person. I have seen his videos, and some historical evidences tell us he's just amazing and an astonishing person. He wrote about Ethiopians. He wrote about Jesus was black. He wrote a lot of things. He told us about different ancient people wrote about Ethiopians. But after he died, we know nothing about the books he has collected from different peoples, from different worlds. He has studied his education from Rome, France, and Germany, and he collected 10,000 and more than 10,000 books talking about Ethiopian, only Ethiopian history, from the beginning of Orthodox till now. But after he passed away, we don't know about the books. That's my question. Why they are trying to collect the ancient books from Ethiopia to their own country? Please tell us more about this. Thank you very much, Dakun David.
That's been my question for several years now. You know, this is the stuff we need to be talking about. Like, if we're serious, look, I already said it. I love my country. I'm biased. I've already showed you my card, right? I don't have any other card to play. But when we're sitting there and we're talking about all the other garbage, that's not going to help us move forward. This is the question of Mehmet Hizkias. You want to make a difference? Let's talk about why these manuscripts are all over the world and we don't even have access to them. Here in Washington, D.C., Library of Congress, Howard University, Catholic University, 3 institutions I have worked with, all have abundance of manuscripts in their disposal. How did they get it? Walters Museum, I went there. There is a gospel manuscript, I think from the 14th, 15th century. One of the earliest manuscripts. I think it is the earliest one in North America. How did it get there? This Olat Mazaf. Dawit, right? This is Dawit. We all know what this is. Dawit. This is everywhere in Ethiopia. Dawit is supposed to be this size, a prayer book. Why? As personal, as handheld. The Gospels are a lot bigger. For example, a text this size, this is Hamanotabo, but a text this size is meant to be for the congregation, is read in the congregation. I saw a prayer book, Mazmura Dawit, that's supposed to be this size, that was this size. Why? You know what that means? That means this book was probably a royal book. It was probably for the king. It was probably meant for a specific area. and that was taken out of the region to go back into or to be taken to the Western world. There's a lot more I could say on this topic. Why are we not talking about this? There were manuscripts being sold on eBay. On eBay, people have stole them out of universities and sold them on eBay. Why is this happening? Isn't this topics we should be talking about? Isn't this better, like, to say, where are my books? Let's go get our books. Let's go reclaim our history. This is where our minds should be focused at. Unfortunately, people are not waking up. And I'm so glad, my brother Abel, that you brought these very pressing issues, and issues that I've been trying to get people to think about. How are manuscripts are gold? They're gold. At Catholic University, over 1.2 or $3 million was it worth. The manuscripts. That's how much they were worth. They're priced at. Hamburg University is moving around with 50 million euros to do Ethiopic studies. 50 million euros. They get their funding from the EU. That's how they're priced. That's how much they're worth. This is the stuff we should be talking about. This is the stuff that matters. If we want to bring change, let's talk about this. How we could talk about our history, how we can talk about our a way to move forward, how we could build a better nation, a better generation, how we could take agency for ourselves. This is the purpose. This is the goal. And I think the more we discuss and we create platforms where we can have honest conversations, better things can happen. But every time we close the door and we curse at each other, we blame each other, then we get into problems. We get into problems.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Other questions?
So yeah, my friend just texted me that who is Prester John? I just want to know about him. Or is he really a myth, or did he really exist?
Excellent question.
Existed.
Excellent question. So we're gonna talk about him as well. We're gonna take. I don't know if we're gonna take a day or if we're gonna take half a day or something. But he's an interesting character. For now, I'll say this. For those of you who don't know, Prester John, it depends who you ask. Let me say. So a lot of people think that Prester John was Zere Yaakov. He was not Zere Yaakov. It was not Zere Yaakov. People think that it was him, but it was not him. Prester John is a historical or a historical figure. So what happened is Europeans, I'll keep it simple for now. I'll get into the details some other time. The Europeans essentially created this person. It seems for whatever reason. And there was this mythical character of Prester John from the land of milk and honey, who is descendant of the three wise men from the east. So this was kind of this notion that existed in Europe around the 11th and 12th century. During Az-Edawit's period, when Az-Edawit was sending delegates to Europe to discover the cross that he was looking for, they entered into Europe, and immediately people were astounded by looking at these people with different clothes and attire and language. And they thought to themselves, clearly, these people are descendants of Prester John. Well, our ancestors being as wise as they were, Probably, this is my imagination. They took their gabi over their face, started laughing, and said, "Let's not tell them who we really are." And instead, they accepted all of their gifts and all of these things and went back. Well, this narrative of Prester John kept growing until about the 14th century, when expeditioners came into Ethiopia to investigate who Prester John was and the land of Prester John. And sure enough, they were able to recognize he was a mythical character. However, they concluded that there was a lot of stuff about the country as well that they published. Their publication now is kind of like the beginning, the foreground of understanding about Ethiopian history. And even within that methodology, I have a lot of things to say about it. But I think that's off topic. So he's an interesting character, and you know, again, he's ahistorical, but he is you know, some fun person to talk about. But a lot of people do think that he was Zere Yaakov. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Diako. Okay.
Awesome. Other questions? Other questions? All right. I think በእንግሊዝኛ ስለሆነ መሰለኝ ሁሉም ሰው ዝም ዝም ብሏል ዛሬ። No problem. We'll get together tomorrow. So tomorrow is the Amharic version. Tomorrow we're doing this talk again in Amharic. So tomorrow, you know, with whatever you know, idea or whatever you guys have, 11 a.m. my time. So this is what is it, like 4 hours before this. If you guys want to come and discuss, you know, we can do that. If nobody else has anything to say, then we can go from there. Again, we'll be able to discuss, and today was a good, I think it was a good day. Can you please continue what you're saying before you were asked the second question? I don't know what that is, Mina, if you want to expand on that, and then I can say a few things. የእንግሊዝኛ ጨዋዎች ነን፣ ያስቃል። I see a question about Oromo. When did Oromo migrate to Ethiopia? This is a difficult question. We don't know, but I'll tell you something. There was the earliest mention of Oromo, Amhara, and Tigray. We don't see anything prior to the 11th century. So based on the written sources that we have, we feel like around the 14th or 15th century, there was some migration towards the northern region of Ethiopia. What does that mean as far as the southern region of Ethiopia? We don't know. We just don't have anything written. Of course, there's the oral tradition. What I've been saying earlier is we can't negate the oral tradition as well. So more investigation needs to be done. But if we rely on the written history, we would say somewhere around the 14th or 15th century, there was some form of migration towards the northern region of Ethiopia. I hope I answered that. All right. Well, I think that's about it. I hope you guys learned something, and then I'll be sure to come tomorrow and talk more. Mina, I promise I'll talk more about this throughout, so don't worry about the. I'll have a lot more to say about the Western concept and what they did and what the Italians did. So hope everybody learned something. Make sure that you guys like this channel, subscribe, and support the channel. I'm able to come here and do what I do because of you guys, and I really do appreciate all the love, all the support, all the sharing. Thank you.